Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced early this morning that the United States will withdraw from a decades-old nuclear weapons deal with Russia. The Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF, signed by President Reagan and Soviet leader Gorbachev back in 1987, was designed to keep ground-based nuclear weapons out of Europe and to halt the Cold War arms race. But now, more than 3 decades later, the United States is pulling out, blaming Russia for violating the deal for far too long. Joining me now, Nayyera, former White House senior director and former senior advisor at the State Department, and Kori Schake, still with me. All right, Kori, for people who know nothing about this treaty, how big of a deal is it?
It's a really big deal for 2 reasons. First, Russia has been in violation of the treaty since 2014. The Obama administration first announced it. And they have continued to make progress developing and deploying the battalions of missiles that violate the treaty. And the most interesting thing about Secretary Pompeo's announcement was the announcement by all 29 NATO allies that they agree that Russia is in material violation of the treaty. That is, this isn't a small around the margins problem. This is like high crimes and misdemeanors when they say material breach. And all 29 NATO allies signed up to that. It's a measure of both how serious Russia's continued violation of the treaty is, and also how much they really want to work in conjunction with the United States because they're afraid about what the Russians are doing.
Well, it's a big positive to see these NATO allies working together. Nayyera, the big fear, though, is that this will give way to a new arms race. Secretary Pompeo was asked about that, and I want to share what he said.
They have begun to move towards what it is that risk you actually have just identified. And you heard me this morning. We'll continue to have conversations with them. We hope they'll come back into compliance. If you just have one party to a treaty complying, you're down the path that you described.
Does Secretary Pompeo have a point?
Well, that treaty compliance is important, and that's certainly the instigating factor. But overall, we have a president right now who himself does not see a problem with having a vast array of nuclear weapons. In fact, he's stated several times publicly, why do we have nuclear weapons if we're not using them? He's been very frank about Saudi Arabia getting nuclear weapons and having no issue. And he's even recently said that North Korea, they'll likely get weapons. So he deals with nuclear weapons in a very cavalier way. He also has this association with Putin, several one-on-one meetings where we don't know what's discussed. So it seems that there may actually be a broader Russia agenda to use Donald Trump to advance Russia's nuclear interests.
Wait. One more time. Walk me through this.
So Putin and Donald Trump have had several one-on-one meetings where we don't know what's been discussed. Donald Trump has known the entire time that Russia has been in violation of this treaty. Donald Trump has also had a very cavalier attitude towards nuclear weapons himself. I think it certainly meets Putin's objective to have a Trump administration and a White House that is not as concerned about nuclear threats and negotiating within the context of a treaty framework. This is all playing into Putin's hands for how he wants to be the leader in Europe.
You agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that. It seems to me that the challenge for people like me who support sustainment of the treaty is how do you bring the Russians back into compliance? The February 2018 nuclear posture review that the Defense Department did suggested that if the Russians didn't come back into compliance, we would begin to develop systems to match the Russians or to counter the Russians, and we would deploy submarine-based cruise missiles, nuclear cruise missiles. That had no effect on the Russians. How do we bring the Russians back into compliance? Because as Secretary Pompeo said, we're complying with the treaty. The Russians aren't.
Well, this is the challenge when you have a president who's not willing to be harsh on Russia. He's lifted sanctions on people close to Vladimir Putin. He has not acted on a Russian interference. He has made actually no strong statements against Russia directly. So he is not coming to this treaty with a strong negotiating power.
My goodness, complicated times. Kori, Nayyera, thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. Coming